Why did it take me so long to get to these books? I don't really have an excuse. Okay guys, so today I want to talk to you about some UK authors that I have been meaning to read for forever and finally got them off my list of shame. So in case you aren't aware, I challenged myself for my winter TBR to read some UK authors over the last couple of months that I have been meaning to get to for forever. So for this video, I have 18 books that we're going to talk about. Now, what's special about this list is that of the 18, there are 6 that are extra special, cream of the crop, perfection standouts that are literally the best books I've read this year. So let's talk about all 18 of these books that I got done with for my winter challenge. And in the meantime, I'm going to begin with the 6 books that I hope you don't make the mistake of waiting so long to read like I did. All right, you guys, let's talk about these 6 books. So these are not ranked in any particular order. So the first one that I want to talk about is a Ian M. Banks book, but it is not a culture book. It is The Algebraist. This is a hefty chunk of a novel that is a not culture book. And I have to say, I have been meaning to read the culture for a long time. I've been a little bit intimidated because the books are big and I don't know where to start and everybody argues over it. And I have to say that this book was the book that people should be recommending to start with Ian Banks. You guys, this is a standalone space opera. It has multiple aliens. It has galaxy-spanning human civilization. We have a impending war. We have a group of friends that are growing up and growing apart. We have a really intriguing mystery through this story. There are so many pieces of this book that what's not to love? I had a fantastic time with this story and would highly recommend it. I feel like more people need to be talking about this book. And it's a lot more easily accessible than I had expected. So, especially with the reprint, definitely do yourself a favor and check this book out. It may not be a perfect book, but it really was one that helped me get lost in the world. And I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed seeing what Ian Banks' imagination can do, as well as his sense of humor. I loved all the aliens. I loved the cultures. Not the culture, but cultures and civilizations. So I loved the civilizations and oh my gosh, this felt like a believable future. So I would highly recommend this one. All right, now the next book on this list is one that I'm sure you guys are tired of me recommending, but I won't stop. Won't stop, can't stop.
Can't stop the signal now.
This is Peter F. Hamilton's Commonwealth Saga. This one starts with Pandora's Star and goes into Judas Unchained. And you guys, I put this off for so long. I have owned this book for over a year and I was just so intimidated by how long it is, and I thought maybe I wouldn't be smart enough to understand it. And I have to tell you that I was so wrong. I am so embarrassed that I haven't read these books in such a long time. I was missing out. I wish I could go rewind time and reread these books. I was heartbroken when Judas Unchained finished. I was heartbroken. So, if you want to know a little bit about what this story is about, the titles give you a really good explanation. So Pandora's Star is kind of similar to Pandora's box. So we have a future advanced human civilization that discovers 2 stars, a pair of stars that kind of flicker out. And there's only one thing that can be, and that is someone has built something blocking off sunlight. We call these the Dyson pairs. And we decide that we have to know. We are too curious. And so we go poke and or open Pandora's box / Pandora's Star and release something that we really shouldn't have. So this book is really complex. There's a lot of different characters thrown at you. And I gotta say, it took me about 8 chapters to figure out if I was gonna like Peter Hamilton's style, his narration. He throws a lot of characters at you. He gives you no spoon feeding whatsoever. But by chapter 8, I noticed I was starting to like the story more. I was understanding who the main characters were, and I was feeling less overwhelmed. I felt like it was easier for me to pay attention to some details and not others. And kind of like going to the gym for the first 2 weeks, which was a little bit of work. Eventually you start wanting to go back to the gym and you start missing working out. And that's how I feel about Peter F. Hamilton's writing. I now crave his writing, and I'm really sad that these books are done. But don't worry, I have several of his books on order. So I have to tell you, do yourself a favor and read these. I know they're intimidating, but you will not regret them, at least if you have similar taste to mine. It was such a wide scoping story. There's so many subplots, so many characters, so many power dynamics, politics, aliens. Like, what isn't there in these books? Oh my gosh, this is a fantastic duology. You guys, when I say this, I don't say this very lightly, but this duology and the Algebraics, which I have upside down, and this book, I am going to put these on the same shelf as Hyperion Cantos. And I don't take that very lightly. I know they're very different stories, but that's how much I enjoyed them. So please do yourself a favor and pick these up. Oh my gosh, you won't regret it. Now let's talk about a rather unknown book that you might pass by because the book cover is very incongruous with the story, and that is The Rig by Roger Levy. This story is a big, thick book, and I'm ashamed to say that I've owned this for more than 2 years without picking it up. Some of it has to do with the fact that I think the cover, while being pretty, is very YA, and it's very discongruous with what this story is actually about. The back cover also does a very terrible job preparing you for what's in the story, so let me give you the general highlights without spoiling anything. This is a future world where we have we have actually many alternating perspectives. One of them is a neurodivergent strategic genius in the future who gets trapped in a interplanetary mob family, and he gets sort of forced into helping them be their strategic genius behind all of their moves. In the meantime, we also have a journalist who in the future is recording people's lives or important sections of people's lives for the social media of the future, because other people can experience your life the way you who, as she begins. And this journalist gets assigned people by an AI, and she starts noticing a pattern in the people that she is asked to record. These stories and many more all come together to make a one cohesive narrative. But the narrative is like secondary, in my opinion, to the believable world and the fact that we have a future where we have solved death. But not everybody gets to experience it. Once you die of anything, as long as we're able to keep your body and your mind intact, we can resurrect you, but only if, after reviewing your whole life, the people, everybody on this planet, gets to vote whether or not you will be revived after so many number of years of being inside your coffin. What an intriguing idea, and a really new way to look at social media and the opinions of others and how important that should or should not be. There's so many really interesting, complex ideas in this one. There is a lot of darkness in this story. Don't let this silly, brightly candy-colored cover make you think that this is not going to be a very dark, very harrowing story, but I would highly, highly recommend this one. It may not be the most scientific story, but it was such a fantastic character story. I really thought the exploration of power dynamics was fantastic in this one, and I would highly, highly recommend this book. Next, in terms of one of the 6 books that I could not get over, is a book that I thankfully found on my library shelf. Thank you to some librarian out there who put it on there. This is a book that I don't physically own by Chris Brookmeyer, and the book is called Places in the Darkness. This is a probably one of the most believable near futures I have ever read. It is a really fun sci-fi thriller crime noir story that follows two different perspectives. I'm going to call them good cop and bad cop, pretty much. And we're in a future where there is a space station, a very large space station that is rotating in the orbit of Earth. And it has become a symbol of hope for all of humanity because we put aside all of our differences and everybody lives in peace in space. And one of our main characters, Alice Blake, gets assigned to be the head government official of this space station right in time for the first public space murder. And of course, the heavily influenced media frenzy style investigation that then has to happen. And she gets paired with the opposite of her, I would say one of the best foils maybe in the book, and that is Nikki, who is a beat cop who is very morally flexible, let's say. And this story is really interesting about two very opposite women trying to investigate this case. And pretty soon there is another body that gets found. The politics and the intrigue go way, way up. And then Nikki is framed for the murder. This story is really fun. It does lean very heavily into a lot of the stereotypes in this kind of story, but this is a book that reminded me why those stereotypes are so used, because it's so well done in this story. If you happen to be somebody who loves those murder mystery crime, this book was a hidden gem for me that I would highly, highly recommend. Next on the list is one that I didn't quite enjoy as much reading it as much as afterward, and that is John Brunner's Stand on Zanzibar. You guys, this is a 1960s Hugo Award winner, one of the reasons why I wanted to read it, but this book really does deserve a whole lot of acclaim because holy cow, is this book something else. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this is probably the most predictive science fiction novel I've ever read. John Brunner in the 1960s got things about our society right that are so very specific that I am just straight up impressed. I mean, we didn't have computers and the internet, and he's already predicting our dependence on social media. And he also predicts the legalization of marijuana. And there's so many very specific predictive things about our future that John Brunner gets right, that this book is just like, I'm in awe of the story. This is a dystopian novel that takes place all about a future where our biggest problem is overpopulation. However, John Brunner decides to make a very interesting narrative choice and specifically starts inserting and interrupting the narrative to put in half newspaper articles, intermittent radio shows or commercials, and while I understand that that was a very cool intellectual thing that he did, you get to know the world around you so much better because of these little snippets. A lot of them don't actually mean anything for the story, at least that I could tell, and they are very jarring. It starts to get a little bit annoying throughout the story because it makes for a very jagged narrative because you're just constantly being interrupted. And I think that really held the story back from the level that I think it could have been, but it's still a fantastic story. While I didn't initially love the reading of it, the further I get away from this book, the more impressed I am by it. There's so many things that other authors have taken from John Brunner, especially this book, and it really does some special things. It's also the most predictive of our future today, and I had to be reminded that some of these things he didn't know about. So I would highly recommend this book if you don't mind working a little bit through your narrative. And I promise you it will pay off. I highly recommend it. And last but not least, in my creme de la creme of this video, we have Alistair Reynolds' Revelation Space. You guys, I know, tomatoes in the comments if you need to, but I gotta tell you, I am so glad I finally got to this novel. It is so space opera with science and ideas that I had not ever come in contact with before until this novel. And while he's not a perfect writer, I think some of his characterizations are a little bit lackluster. The ideas, the plot, the way he incorporates science into this story, what Revelation Space actually is, and how that matters for the end of the story. This one was fantastic. I cannot wait to read more by Alistair Reynolds, specifically this trilogy. I really had a great time with it, and I am so embarrassed that it's taken me so long to read this one. I highly recommend working through these 6 books that I cannot believe took me so long to read. Don't make the same mistake that I did and pick one of these up. I promise you won't regret it. Now, I do want to talk about some of the other UK authors that I read. A lot of them I still really enjoyed. They just weren't best books of the year for me. So let's talk about another Alistair Reynolds book that I don't know how to feel about, and that is Aversion. This is a more recent story, and you can tell he's trying to work on his storytelling, his characterization. This book, though, seems to be one of those stories that is a science fiction novel written for people who don't like science fiction. I would probably use it as that. This idea was a really intriguing idea, but the execution of the idea isn't great. We're following a particular character who is a ship's surgeon or a doctor in the Arctic, and they are exploring and discover one of the previous exploration teams has not made it, and they find them stuck in the ice. And this is something that this ship's surgeon continues to relive. And for the first half of the story, we're getting this story over and over again to the point where I don't understand what we're doing and almost DNF'd it. However, there is a reason why this is happening. I just would argue that it didn't need to happen as many times as he did it to make his point. So I think there's some execution issues for this one, and that's why I didn't love it as much, but I think the idea is really solid and really interesting. I just am having a hard time deciding how I feel about it. The next author that I read 2 books by is Brian Aldiss. So I read Hot House and I read Nonstop. And these are both really famous stories by him. I'm so glad I finally got to Brian Aldiss. His ideas and his writing is almost like a comfort writing for me. I really enjoy the way that he puts sentences together. Hot House is a really intriguing idea. Our sun is dying, and therefore Earth has finally stopped rotating. So we have one half of the planet that's facing the sun at all times. It's constantly hot. It's a jungle-style planet. And the other half of Earth is cold and frigid. And so as a result, all of the life on Earth has really changed evolutionarily, including humans. We have kind of regressed in our society, and we have also gotten smaller. And so we are being plagued by plants now, and we're following one particular little tribe of people and their exploration into the world. It is kind of a coming of age story, but there's a lot of like really incredible little details throughout the story. I thought this one was good. I thought it was very intriguing, but I have to say, Nonstop, also known as Starship, was my favorite of the 2. Nonstop is another regressed society, and we're following them as they realize that they are on a spaceship, and they don't remember how they got there. Generations and generations have gone by. There is quite a few other stories who use this as a plot point, but Brian Aldiss was one of the first, albeit not the first, And what I liked about the story is some of the reveals at the end make it a little bit more of a full story. I had a really fun time with the characters in Nonstop, and I didn't care as much about the characters in Hot House as I did in Nonstop. So take that for what you will. I would highly recommend some Brian Aldiss if you haven't read any. He's definitely a classic sci-fi author that definitely gets my stamp of approval. Speaking of classic science fiction authors, I also got done with two more John Wyndham stories. I read Midwich Cuckoos by him and The Chrysalids. And I have to say, I think The Chrysalids is my favorite of the two, probably because it reminds me of a really intriguing mix of Ray Bradbury and also Stephen King. He writes slice of life really fantastically. That's where the Stephen King comes in. And also, Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes is very reminiscent. We have a juvenile main character who is living in a regressed society where they almost have a religious fervor belief that anything that is other or outside of the way that it's supposed to be is dangerous to the community and destroyed, including things like plants or people or ideas. And this means that being different is being dangerous. Now, our main character grows up with this world and slowly discovers that he might be one of the things that are different in this society. And because he is afraid for his life, he begins to hide it and reach out for others of his community. There's a lot of really interesting statements about the way that human society is structured in this novel, and I had a fantastic time with it, but I'm a little confused about the ending and what that means for John Wyndham. If you're interested in a little bit more of what I'm talking about, definitely go check out my Goodreads review, but otherwise we can talk about it in the comments section or on Discord. As for Midwich Cuckoos, we have a city of Midwich. This one reminds me a little bit more of Stephen King. And all of the women in this city get pregnant all at the same time. And even women who don't have husbands, it's all magical. And they all give birth around the same time. But what exactly are they giving birth to? And what kind of kids are these going to be? This one was a little bit more haunting, but there's no horror elements really, in my opinion. At least I wasn't afraid, and I'm a little bit of a chicken. So I had a good time with this one, but I have to say, of the two, I liked The Chrysalids a little bit more. Again, I might be a little bit more of a Ray Bradbury girl, but both of them were great. And I can't wait to read more John Wyndham. The next one on this list is Charles Stross. Talk about a very different author. Charles Stross is more of a modern contemporary author, and I have read a couple of his other books, but I have been meaning to pick up something else by him. And the first book in his Laundry Files series came up called Atrocity Archives. This is very much a parody style story that is just a fun, episodic, I'm going to call it the Dresden Files, but sci-fi. It's maybe a little bit more akin to Men in Black. We have a secret government organization whose job it is to hide alien technology or technology that goes beyond what we understand of physics and technology. And we get to follow these people who work for the Laundry, which is the government organization, in these different fun adventure stories. And I gotta say, this one was really fun. I highly recommend it if you're looking for a palate cleansing read. It doesn't require a whole lot of the reader, which I appreciated, and I found it to be a little bit more funny than maybe some of the other British humor out there, so I would highly recommend it. Then we have a book that I know I've read the author before, but I've been meaning to get to for a while, and that is Adrian Tchaikovsky's Shards of Earth. So this is one of those trilogies that's been finished for a little bit, and I've owned it again for a couple of years, and I finally got to it this season. So I'm really happy to say that I was very pleasantly surprised by this story. We find that humans are against an alien race, they call them the Architects, who come out of nowhere and don't seem to care how many weapons we throw at them, and instead they carve up a planet to be A beautiful sculpture, but absolutely uninhabitable. And it turns out they have done this across the universe to almost all sentient races' home planets. However, humans have many other planets that they have emigrated to, and we discover that those architects are on their way to those planets. So we're in a race for survival, trying to figure out how we can possibly fight back against somebody who we are so underclassed it's not even funny. This story reminds me a little bit of Revelation Space and a little bit of the three body problem, and I had a really good time with it. I'm really surprised. I can't wait to get into book 2 and 3, hopefully in May. Next, we have Stephen Moss's Fear the Sky. This is one that I think somebody recommended to me in the comment section down below, and I had on my list, so I just picked it up. In this story, we have a near future Earth where a asteroid is coming at Earth. And to everyone's relief, it breaks up in the atmosphere and it hits the oceans around the world. However, as scientists begin to explore a little bit more, they discover that it only hit the oceans in the deepest part of the entire planet consistently. That doesn't make sense. We begin to see a lot more weird events that happen after the asteroid hits the Earth, and a lot of people begin to wonder if this was a natural event or not, and what that could mean, and if we're about to be invaded. This story was fine. It was interesting. It was very action-packed. It definitely leans on a lot of stereotypes and tropes, but for me, it was ultimately a little bit forgettable because I've seen this story over and over, and it didn't have characters that I really came to love. It didn't have anything new or fresh for me, and overall, I find that I'm more excited about other series, so I don't think I will be continuing this one, but it was perfectly good. It was a perfectly fine read. I just didn't find myself as intrigued to continue the series. Next, we have another classic, and that is one that I have sworn I would not continue to read, and here we are, I read it, and that is H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. You guys, I read Invisible Man and absolutely hated it and swore I would never read anything by H.G. Wells, and it kind of kept landing in my lap, and I had a lot of friends who really just encouraged me to try it, and I'm really glad I did. I have to say, it was much better than Invisible Man. This story is one that I think we all know. Martians invade Earth, and it was probably one of the original alien invasion stories. Because of that, I think that we're all a lot more familiar with the story than I would have expected. It did remind me a little bit of John Wyndham in that it was a little bit of a slow apocalypse. It unrolls very slowly. There's lots of slice of life in it, even though there is some action. And I can see how it impacted the genre, so I can appreciate what it did for our future stories. But and I did genuinely enjoy it. However, I was also surprised that there was quite a lot of commentary about human nature and our reaction to this invasion at the end of the story. Did not expect that, and it was a welcome addition to the story. I also found myself kind of intrigued to check out the radio show that was famously made from this and see exactly what all the fuss was about. So if any of you guys have listened to that, it is available on YouTube if you're ever interested. But I do actually recommend War of the Worlds, although it is not going to be as action-packed as you may expect something like that to be. Another book that I picked up is by Adam Roberts, and this is Lake of Darkness. This was one that I picked up with a couple of my Discord members. We decided to read it in April, and I'm glad we did. This is a recent release, and I also have some mixed feelings on this one. This one takes place on a science vessel who is surrounding a black hole and studying it. And as it turns out, the engineer begins to say that they are hearing voices and that the voices are speaking to them from inside the black hole. Now, everyone knows that can't be true, and pretty soon The engineer gets very offended and begins to murder everyone in the crew. The alien voice that's coming from the black hole begins to tell him that he is the devil and is trapped within the black hole and wants to be released. Of course, everyone ignores this, thinking that the engineer had a psychotic break, and we continually send in more and more crews to investigate what happens. But they don't have very good outcomes either. In the end of this story has some really intense, very mind warping ideas that I would put in the realm of PKD or Philip K. Dick, which was really fantastic. I don't say that about a lot of stuff, but I honestly think that the execution of this one was very poorly done. I really had to reach pretty far to believe that humans would continually make the same mistake over and over, sending in more and more crews, and no one would ask questions or figure it out. I found that to be something that I think Adam Roberts thinks is funny. This might be that British humor that I keep hearing about.
Well, no, but that's just hypercritical.
Maybe some of that absurdism that I don't find very funny. Unfortunately, Mr. Roberts thinks he's funnier than he really was in this story, and it really made me feel condescended and annoyed in this story. So I didn't love this one, but I can see how some people might if you don't mind that kind of sense of humor or that style of writing. So I am going to say that I did end up going ahead and giving it 3 stars, somewhat begrudgingly, because I can see where this would be a really cool book if only he hadn't tried to make it funny. Unfortunately. So that said, enter this one at your own risk. I would also probably say that for people who really loved Eversion, you might really like this story as well. And last but not least, we have Keith Roberts' Pavane. This is one that is an alternate history that I've heard a lot about because we have a world in which the Church of England never happened. And for whatever reason, we are still very Catholic in England, and how that would change all of history. Well, this is a very intriguing premise, especially because science and faith are always fighting in this novel, and we have a potential revolution that is coming. The back of the book cover sounds a lot more intriguing than the actual story was, unfortunately. The story read a little bit more like some very loosely connected vignettes. There were a lot of historical events that I didn't really understand the context of. I had to constantly look up other people's interpretations of the story to figure out what had changed, because I am not that familiar with British history. I found that to be kind of a failing of this book. If it can't stand alone and it's something that I'm constantly having to look up other people's opinions to understand what's going on in the story, unfortunately, I feel like this book and I just did not get along. I do think that maybe I will give it another chance and a reread in the future. Maybe I was in a weird mood or I didn't understand the context. I'm really sad because I thought for sure this would be one that I would be very interested in. But sadly, the back book of cover sounds a lot more exciting than the actual execution of the story for me. So this is also definitely a me problem, so I'm going to apologize in advance, but I did not enjoy this one, sadly. That does it for all of the UK authors that I got done with for my winter TBR, but don't worry, there are lots more that I'm still hoping to get to. If you haven't already seen my spring TBR and book haul, definitely go check that out. There are some British authors in that one, and I am not yet giving up on all these UK authors. Until next time, you guys, see ya in the next video.